I do my best working up subconsciously. Like if I try to inject things that mean stuff, it happens very ham-fistedly. I used to get these parking tickets on my car, and this was kind of like right when I was fresh out of art school and still like working at like an entry-level food service job. Getting like a $28 parking ticket could be like a real day ruiner. Me and my friends were kind of having this discussion about like what to do when we get like these tickets and we're like, payday was 2 weeks ago and rent's coming up. We kind of like fell into this thread of like how as artists do we utilize like our very specific set of skills to circumnavigate like this very sort of like ubiquitous metropolitan problem. And it felt pretty straightforward that what I do is I paint, and by taking these tickets that the city would leave on my car that cost me $28 to receive, what I would do is paint on these tickets, and then whoever wishes to pay the bill off for me can have it. I had a lot of friends who like couldn't afford, like more expensive canvas paintings. It was all very exciting that suddenly I was like producing a body of work that like all my friends and colleagues could afford. I'll do these sketches just because I have like, a mile-long reference folder of images that I want to sort of dissect through painting. Like really quickly, I'll kind of like put one down on one of these tickets or invoices. Then I'll like hang it up on my wall in my studio and start to dissect it, which is like what worked here, what didn't work here. Did I use the right color? Is there too much contrast between like the light and the shadow? So I'll have these like initial sketch pieces to be sort of like this piece of meditation that I can kind of like look at and dissect before I decide to do something a little bit more ambitious on a canvas. And when I post the parking tickets on Instagram, I think the average sale time for them is probably about 5 to 10 seconds. I'll post a ticket on Instagram, and maybe like 20 people get a push notification, and I'll get all of them commenting dibs within maybe like a 2 to 3 second range. And I have to like screenshot what like my notifications look like so that I can like prove that this person made it by like half a second. There is a growing commission arm of the Still Cheaper Than Paying project that I reserve for anything that's more expensive than maybe like $200 to $300. At least at the time of this filming, I have maybe 3 invoices from my mechanic that are at about $500 each that I'm like waiting for buyers for. I also have a collector who has pledged to pay 1 year of my car insurance in exchange for the monthly bills, which has been really nice. So far, I haven't made a penny worth of profit on this project. If I receive a ticket for $36, I'll sell it for $36. If I receive a mechanic invoice for $238.41, I'll invoice the buyer $238.41. I'm very willing to die on the hill that memes are maybe the avant-garde of visual arts. A large majority of these parking ticket paintings are actually just like memes that I've thought to be like particularly funny at the time of painting. And this sort of like helps my ability to sort of like document meme culture in like sort of like this like more concrete physical way. Because after a meme falls out of fashion, it just gets like lost in the noise of the internet, never to be seen again. The concept net zero, and it's a pretty far one out there. As like kind of like the demand for these pieces have gone up, and the I guess like the value of my work has been appreciating. It's becoming more and more realistic that I can start expanding the project out. Maybe somebody would love to pay a year of my studio rent, or even further down the line, somebody might like to pay for the rent at my like next apartment. As the project is progressing, I get closer and closer to this idea of net zero, where I'm personally paying for less and less of my like initial living costs. The conceptual backbone of Still Cheaper Than Paying isn't really like the images that I put on these tickets, but it's more so the modality of the transaction. I can never sell these for more than like the intrinsic value of like the piece of paper that I've been assigned, because then it stops being like this concept process of addressing like what it's like to receive parking tickets or bills or things like that, and it just becomes sort of like this just cheap paint on paper practice that anybody could do. This piece right here I think was one of the latter ones I finished right before we hung the exhibition up. The backyard is like vaguely modeled after my parents' backyard, On some summers, the love bugs got really bad, and they would get inside the screen and just sort of like swarm. So I kind of want to, address this like pool summer and address the screen, and address these like, insect-thickened summers, and just to kind of like, throw things a little bit off kilter and maybe kind of like adds one notch of kind of like a classical horror. I wanted there to be, this like swarming event happening like right off of the frame of the painting that kind of like leaves the viewer to ask themselves like, what are these bugs swarming? Could it be like a, fresh fruit, or, like a cake, or, perhaps a corpse? I used to take 95 North to get from the studio back to my apartment. And the exit that I would take on 62nd Street always had this wrong way sign that I would notice in the rearview mirror of my car. Every time I passed that sign, I would just kind of like flash in my head for 1 second, like, this is a painting, this is a painting. So after a couple months of that, I kind of just like finally like pulled a canvas out of storage and started to grapple with a lot of the things that were going, like this reverse text, this like cadmium red that's amongst, like a very gray like side of the 95 landscape. All these instances of framing, like I'm looking through my car window, through a mirror, through a sign. Just through that, I kind of just like, piece by piece formulated, this painting that's just, at the end of the day, kind of like a very straightforward, this is what happens when you look at a sign through a mirror, and the sign is, directing, like which way you're supposed to be facing. With this piece, I was really kind of like interested in creating this, like not quite a sense of danger, but sort of like this sense of being enclosed. I was watching a lot of horror movies at the time, specifically It Follows, and I was just kind of like interested in this idea of, like this feeling of being in the bathroom stall, and there's this other thing, maybe a person, maybe it's not, on the other side, and the figure on the other side of the bathroom stall isn't really like, it's not emoting any sense of danger, it's not like implying any intentions of harm, but it is doing something that people aren't really supposed to do to other people who are like in a bathroom stall, which is like stand very close with the door right there. So this is kind of like another instance of, I just get like one or two things like a little bit wrong, and then, leave it up to the viewer to decide what exactly is like the narrative behind there. Like, why is there somebody, like almost looking through the door of a bathroom stall towards the viewer? Is it, an accident? Are they waiting for the bathroom? Or is there maybe like something more sinister at play? The painting process is like sort of a process, like I don't really know when I start a painting where it's gonna wind up. And just by the instance of this painting, some of the ideas that came to me during the process required just sort of like an additional canvas so that I could address the floor more readily. I think I did this about late 2019, because my exhibition's being shown in junction to the recent William Glackens acquisitions. It felt very fair that the dark Glackens painting and the dark triptych behind me kind of has a chance to essentially communicate with each other and like act as a bridge between the now and the then. This piece was very anecdotal. It was directly linked to my adolescence growing up in Brevard County, where there was one day where all my friends and I were hanging out in the downtown Melbourne area, and we were just like, being goofy teenagers or whatever, kind of like walking down the street and like loitering around town. And then in front of the post office, we came across just this random light post that somebody had duct taped a dead fish to. And it was very like, it felt very crucificial, like this like dead fish duct taped to a post. Me and my friends just kind of like, we like glanced at each other really briefly, and then like got on our hands and knees and started worshiping like what we still recognize to be as pole fish. I've been turning it over in my head, I think, what would be the most appropriate like shrine for our beloved pole fish. So in the original sketch, I included cigarettes, which are very often included on like the shrines of like people who have passed who were maybe smokers, or I know in many cultures tobacco is considered to be sort of like this holy offering. But it felt a little bit too like, like rebellious teenager on the nose, so I omitted the cigarettes in the final piece for the show here, and instead kind of added these grass reeds, which I felt were like a little bit quieter and more sensible, and also didn't have quite as direct ties to maybe like Western religion, so it was a little bit less obvious. And then I included the steak knife. Every time that I like paint like a like a full fleshed figure into my work, it just opens up like this whole other conversation that I'm not really quite apt to be having about like the complicated history of like figure painting. So it allows me to kind of like continue on with these ideas that I have about composition and narrative, but I don't actually have to deal with this history of figure painting, which I think is interesting, but not necessarily the wheelhouse of the things that I'm trying to address with my work. This is actually a reference to a cartoon that I used to watch a lot as a kid. I always joke around and I say the Cartoon Network show Edna and Eddie was one of the original cornerstones of my sense of like curiosity. It was just these three kids just living in the cul-de-sac. There was never any parents around. It was like entirely a kid-based society, and like this like candy-based economy that they were in. And just when I first saw that show, my imagination was just like sparked. And I would like watch a show and then like try to replicate whatever like weird scams that they were getting into, like with like my brother and my cousins. And this piece is referencing sort of like this one episode that also happened to be referencing Hansel and Gretel. In some ways, I would say it's a self-portrait, but I actually haven't worn that pair of shoes in maybe a year. What I do is I kind of like think of it more as like this very base generic idea of a self-portrait. So it's not really like referencing me, but it's sort of like referencing like this idea of how I feel like in my specific like demographic as being kind of like this dude who grew up in like Central Florida, like around skaters and all that. This is like the pants and shoes setup of people who I relate to. So it's kind of like this like a bit of a wider breadth than like just my specific identity. I would not have been able to get anywhere close to here if it wasn't for the type of support that I've been getting from like the local institutions. Bakehouse Art Complex picked me up near immediately after I'd finished my bachelor's and gave me a studio space to work outside of that wasn't the bedroom of like my shared apartment. And then last year I was able to join Oolite when we went to the Anderson Ranch residency over in Colorado, which was a very legitimizing opportunity for me and helped kind of help me be taken more seriously as a Miami artist. And then now I have this exhibition here at NSU, which is kind of just like snowballed those two things into this whole new animal that I'm having a very fun time navigating.